Thank you, Leticia, for coming on my show. I'm Ronick, and you're watching Tired Know All Our podcast. And today's guest is Leticia. Thank you for joining me today on this Wednesday of ours.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You mind me asking, what's your story? Like, why did you want to join me today?
So, I am a trauma recovery mentor, author of Survival Mode Action Plan, and the host of Survival Mode Disrupted, which is another podcast. I have been through a tremendous amount, and I like to share my story in hopes that I can have a further discussion about the residual impact of trauma.
What do you mean, like a thorough discussion?
I believe that we don't discuss the residual impacts of trauma enough. And I believe by sharing my story, it can bring awareness to that and perhaps open up a discussion where people don't normally have.
Yeah, I agree totally on that. I normally start with what was your childhood like? Like, could you tell me where did you grow up?
I am originally from Bermuda. I was born and raised there, a little island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And my childhood was, I wouldn't say it was great, but it wasn't horrible until around 7. My parents divorced when I was very young. Both of them remarried, and they remarried people who really didn't want anything to do with me. At the same time, I was also molested by a neighbor, and I felt very alone for a very long time as a result.
What was it like living out? Like, did you say you lived out on a little island?
Yeah, Bermuda is an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It is 21 square miles.
What was that like?
It was, I mean, I think it's normal because it's all that I know. But it's a very small community. We only have probably around that time, it was probably about 50,000 people living there. It's about 72 now. But yeah, it's a very small community with West Indian influences. And yeah.
You said your parents got divorced. What could you tell me more? What was your parents like your bio parents to be exact?
My mother is an amazing woman. That's the one who I have a relationship with. My father, in my belief, is a narcissist. He was very self-centered, and only really focused on his needs and his wants. To be honest, by the time I got to be about 7, I think I was primarily alone. I will classify it as being, I felt like I was emotionally neglected. While they were both in my life, I don't think that I got what I needed from them emotionally. As I said, they both married people who didn't really want anything to do with me. So I spent a lot of time with my grandmother and my aunts, and really feeling like I was in the middle of two family units. They were focusing on their marriages and the families they built within that marriage, where I was kind of just like not
Your own
part of
thing.
that. Yeah.
What was your grandma like? You said you spent a lot of time with her.
Yeah, she was an absolutely amazing woman. She was an entrepreneur. She had raised 7 children herself, and most of my cousins, as well as me. And she was really supportive and very active in raising me. She used to pick me up from school. She used to take care of me summertimes. She was just really an amazing woman.
You said on the post and everything that you were groomed when you were 14. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, you were really young when the first one happened. Like, how did the second one happen?
Yeah, so as a result of growing up in the middle of these two family units, I spent a lot of time outside of my home. And as a result, I was around people who were much older than me. I used to hang with these 2 women who were in their early 20s, and I was probably about 12 or 13. And they would introduce me to man so that the man would sleep with me. And I lost my virginity when I was 12 to someone who was in their 20s. And that was pretty much what happened with me. I later met someone who was twice my age, and he introduced me to relationships. I had never been in a relationship prior to that. He wanted to claim that he wanted to be my boyfriend. He took really good care of me. Anything that I wanted, I would have. If I wanted sneakers, he would buy them for me. He used to come and pick me up from school with alcohol in the back of the car. And basically, he was, I would say, my escape from my home life. What I didn't realize back then at that time was he was kind of sweetening me up, which allowed me to trust him without any hesitation. And that process actually groomed me for the abuse that I later received from him.
Were the girls like 20-year-olds, older women? Were they when you like when they tried to get you laid and everything? Did they? Did you think of it as like, oh, you were trying to be like one of the cool kids, or like was it just peer pressure?
I think it was peer pressure and me, because I felt like I had been emotionally abandoned, really just wanting someone to see me for me. And accept me for me, which is why I was very open to meeting man, because in my mind, if a man sees me, if he likes me, that's the attention that I want.
Were any of the men nice, or were they just all using you?
They were all using me. Anyone in their 20s that is dealing with a young teenager. I mean, this started when I was in my preteens. So a preteen or young teenager, they don't want anything from that other than sex. So yeah, I was used for years and didn't realize it. And I thought it was filling a void for me, which it really wasn't. It was creating a bigger problem.
Did the years following that kind of like, were they just the same? You felt like you were just alone, or did like how did the years going forward?
The guy that I mentioned that I met when I was 14 and entered into a relationship with, he became a very central part of my life because I didn't have a great relationship with my parents. I spent a lot of time out of my home, and I spent a lot of time with him. The first time he put his hands on me, I was 15 years old. He tried to choke me. And I knew then that I needed to leave that circumstance. I broke up with him when he put his hands on me. But the problem was now I am forced to go back to my home and spend a lot of time at home because I didn't have that escape. And I had a lot of problems because I wasn't able to escape from my home life, and I end up going back to this guy. He I eventually got kicked out of my mother's home, and he took me in. He housed me. So I basically was living with him from the time I was 17, and I married him at 19. And the whole time I was being abused. But because I had been kicked out of my mother's home and I, at that point, did not have a relationship with my father, I stayed because if I didn't, I would be homeless.
What was the reason for him hurting you?
He had a long history of violence. Very long history. When my mother found out about him around the time I was about 15, she had did a background check and learned that every one of his relationships ended in restraining order. So he was prolific in controlling women and abusing them. Did he have a reason? I don't know, but that was his MO.
Was it like anger issues, or like did he just do it for the heck of it?
I would say it was probably a combination of anger issues, drinking issues, and control issues. He felt that because he gave me a place to live, he had the right to control me.
Other than yes, sleeping with men, were there any other men? Like, did you have any other relationships besides him, or was it like the only one really?
At that time, that was my only serious relationship, and it lasted for 8 years.
8 years, so that was like a long time. You were stuck in that situation.
Yes.
Did you ever tell anyone, or did it go back to like you were homeless? You didn't really have anywhere else to stay.
I was ashamed. I knew that what was happening shouldn't be happening, but I didn't want to admit to anybody that this man who I had spent years justifying the reason why I had been in a relationship with him was actually harming me. Any abuse survivor will tell you that shame and guilt is predominantly the reason why they don't speak up. They don't want to be judged, number one. And they also often feel guilty for allowing themselves to stay in that situation. So, no, I really didn't tell people the extent of what was going on. I might have hinted to people that I was unhappy, especially once I got married, but to go into detail about what was going on behind closed doors, no, that never happened.
What about your folks, like, or just any family? Like, you said your mom did like some background checks, but like, how did she feel about the whole getting married and like dating and all that kind of stuff?
People really didn't express too much to me. I would say, particularly when I was in my teens, I was hot headed. I was very stubborn. So even if they had expressed their concerns, I wouldn't have heard it.
Did you ever tell anyone, or did it go back to like you were homeless, you didn't really have anywhere else to stay?
I was ashamed. I knew that what was happening shouldn't be happening, but I didn't want to admit to anybody that this man who I had spent years justifying the reason why I had been in a relationship with him was actually harming me. Any abuse survivor will tell you that shame and guilt is predominantly the reason why they don't speak up. They don't want to be judged, number one. And they also often feel guilty for allowing themselves to stay in that situation. So, no, I really didn't tell people the extent of what was going on. I might have hinted to people that I was unhappy, especially once I got married, but to go into detail about what was going on behind closed doors, no, that never happened.
What about your folks, like, or just any family? Like, you said your mom did like some background checks, but like, how did she feel about the whole getting married and like dating and all that kind of stuff?
People really didn't express too much to me. I would say, particularly when I was in my teens, I was hot headed. I was very stubborn. So even if they had expressed their concerns, I wouldn't have heard it.
Were you like an angry person, or were you just on your own pretty much?
I was angry. I was angry because I felt that my parents had failed me. I was angry because I was in a situation that I didn't want to stay in, but I knew I had to. Otherwise, like I said, I would be
Mhm.
homeless. And I was also angry at the fact that my life was turning into something that I hadn't foreseen for myself.
Did your life ever kind of, because like you seem like you have your life to kind of together from what I hear and everything. Like, how did that point go? Like, where did that happen?
So at 21, I was stabbed by my husband. He found out that I was communicating with another man. There wasn't any sex involved, but at that point, it was I wanted out of the marriage. I was scared to leave. He found out about it and he stabbed me. And I was then forced to live in a homeless shelter for several months as I pieced my life back together. I thought that by leaving that relationship and getting a divorce, that my life would magically go back to normal. And that was a very, very uh, bad assumption. I struggled with all of the things that were going on inside my head to be 22 and divorced. I felt immense shame um, to have to piece my life together pretty much by myself at that age. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted out of life. And I think for many years, I really just drank to silence the thoughts that were in my head. I eventually left Bermuda and I moved to Atlanta to go to university. And I thought that by leaving Bermuda, again, my life would just fall back into place. But I never really spent time committing to healing myself or working through the things that I needed to in order to grow and move forward. So, as a result of that, I ended up in another abusive relationship. This time, it wasn't a physically abusive relationship, but I ended up in a relationship with someone who was a cocaine addict. And he financially abused me. He emotionally abused me. Um, and that relationship ended when I found out that he was actually married after living with him for several years.
The man you were talking about, was he the same man from when you were like 17, or was that different?
Completely different. I was in a completely different country. And I guess I didn't recognize that it was abuse until years later, because I had come out of such an abusive relationship, physically abusive. Sorry.
What?
Sorry, it was something ringing and I thought you would hear it. Although I was in a physically abusive relationship the first time, I didn't recognize that I was being financially and emotionally abused in the second one. I eventually left the US and I moved back to Bermuda, and I entered into a relationship quite quickly with a crack addict. I didn't know that he was a crack addict until I was very deep in that relationship. And again, I was financially abused. I felt like the man that I was attaching myself to were taking full advantage of me, and my inability to love myself correctly. And I end up getting arrested on my job, my corporate job, because of my boyfriend who was addicted to crack. He was working in a high-end restaurant, and he ended up stealing. He was stealing, systematically stealing from that restaurant. And one day he had asked me to go pick up a bag for him,
Like
and I
money?
did. I didn't know what was in the bag, but what it was high-end meats. He was stealing like slabs of ribeye and lamb and selling it to buy drugs. So when I went to pick up the bag, the security intercepted the bag, and I laughed, thinking that that was it. And several weeks later, the police came to my job to arrest me for handling stolen goods. When I was in jail, I called my mother and I told my mother that I needed a lawyer. And she came to the jail and she asked me one question. She asked me, why did I love everyone more than I loved myself? And that question was like a Mike Tyson body blow, because it brought me to reality that like my life is like this because I'm loving these men who don't actually love me back. Um, but that was a residual impact of not feeling completely loved by my parents, right? I spent years seeking the love that I didn't get as a child.
If you could sit at a table, like, to your younger self, like, is there any advice you would give to her?
Absolutely. Love yourself, and that should be your only priority.
Why is that?
I didn't value me. I put my value in the external validation and attention that I got from everyone else. Had I known how to love me, I would have walked away from so many situations that caused me harm. Um, you know, I probably wouldn't have been stabbed. I probably wouldn't have been taken advantage of by two addicts. My life wouldn't have been so sad had I known how to love me. And that was something that I learned in my 30s.
Many consider children to be like a sign of love. Did any of your relationships, and you, like, did they ever consider, like, oh, we should have a child together?
I wasn't able to have children until I was in my 30s. I have two daughters that I had with my now husband.
How did you meet him?
He is the crack addict. He cleaned up his life, and we moved to England, where we now reside.
If I can ask, what was that process like?
I would say I still prioritize him. I prioritize, I actually took his recovery as my own responsibility. And I recognize now that that was a mistake. So I anchored in to being the best support I could be for him so that he would stay clean, still ignoring my own needs. But moving to England, I think allowed us both to press reset and really reinvent our lives. And I spent many years still in in commercial insurance. I built my career in England. I was working at Lloyd's of London. And for those who don't know, Lloyd's is the birthplace of insurance. So for me, this was the pinnacle of my career, working at a Lloyd's of London syndicate, managing a multinational team. But I still, at that time, needed to do more work on myself and needed to heal and learn how to prioritize myself. That's something that I didn't learn until very late.
You might have already said it, and I apologize, but at what point was that, you think?
At what point was what?
You had to prioritize yourself, you had to work on yourself?
There was a reconciliation that I had been in survival mode for quite a long time. And survival mode, for those who don't know, is a state of extended fight or flight. I was in autopilot while I was progressing in my career, while I was doing amazing there. Every other element of my life was just a shambles. I got up every day, I went to work, but I wasn't facing the things that made me upset or angry. So I eventually started working with a coach, which allowed me to first of all peel back the layers of my compounded trauma. The molestation was a trauma. The emotional neglect I received from my parents was trauma. The grooming was trauma. Every relationship, every serious relationship was trauma. And I never dealt with that. So I had to peel back those layers and really get honest with myself and allow myself to feel all that pain that I had learned to compartmentalize so that I can heal and move forward. And as a result of all of that work, I then became a coach to help other people navigate their own trauma and their own, you know, chaotic lives.
As we talked about all of this, like, you have a podcast. Like, is this kind of like, is all that together like a reason why you chose to create the Survival Mode Distributor?
Yes, so Survival Mode Disrupted is a storytelling podcast where I invite guests to share their own traumas, but not just the trauma, what it took to get beyond it. And the main reason why I started this podcast was because I recognized that had I known that I had been traumatized and I was operating from trauma responses and the residual impact of trauma, I would have done something differently. So the podcast is something that I created to give other people awareness, because a lot of times we think that what we are experiencing is was siloed. Nobody else can understand what I'm going through, and that's not necessarily the truth. So on this podcast, we have people who have been molested, abused. I had episode today that came out today that was this woman is a survivor of incest, and we've had cult survivors, and just so people can understand what it looks like after trauma and be able to pinpoint the things that they need to heal from.
And like, what about your book? Because you also created a book, I believe.
Yes, Survival Mode Exit Plan is my book, and it's basically the same thing. We When we are in survival mode, we are literally in autopilot. And my book is a non holds bar, really raw guide to how to step out of that. And that starts with self awareness, it starts with letting go of your survival identity, then moving on to reprogramming, letting go of the stories that we tell ourselves, redefining success, and then finally living in that so that we are taking radical ownership of our lives.
Thank you, Leticia. Thank you for coming on my show and being a guest today. It was awesome to have you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I appreciate it. I love the opportunity to share my story in hopes that it will help at least one person.
Yeah, I hope this does too. And I have one thing before you go, if you don't mind. I have this thing where you get 15 seconds to share out a social of yours, company, just whatever you think, whatever you want to share out. You understand?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1, go.
If you are looking to connect with me, you can do so by reaching me on my website, LeticiaReneeFrancis.com, LeticiaReneeFrancis.com.
Hey guys, what's up? Thank you for checking that episode out, and I'm glad you enjoyed that a bonus episode. Please go check her out. She seems like a nice lady. So the links for anything shared are most likely down in the description as always. So any episode you want to check something out, go down in the description or there's a QR on the screen. Anyways, I hope you enjoy. And just to note, I do have Spotify. So if you want to listen to this just headphones wise, or you just don't want to look at my face, check that out too. And follow that. Anyways, I hope to see you next Wednesday, and cheers, matey. Later.